Welcome to the Work Shouldn't Suck mini conference put on here and hosted by the Work Revolution. My name is Kent Frazier. I'm going to be your host for today. And I just want to take a couple minutes to really welcome everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. We all have crazy busy lives these days and we're running around like crazy. And so I thought maybe if just for a couple seconds, we could just get grounded together and maybe just try to bring into your awareness, your breath, drop into your body and see if there's something that you can tap into from a place of gratitude. What is it that you can be thankful for today as we move into our days? So just take a couple seconds, get grounded, connect as we spend the next 2 hours together. Drop in. Excellent. So we're doing this on our Zoom platform today. For the Q&A, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there'll be a little Q&A button, and you can ask questions in there as we go along. At the end of each speaker, we're going to have an opportunity to ask them some questions with respect to what they've offered for us this morning. And we'd also like to host a Q&A at the end of our all three conversations this morning, so we can have a Q&A with all the panelists. So questions and Q&A with Zoom. Other than that, let's get going. And I first want to start, this is why I get out of bed every morning. This is my wife, Christine, my 6-month-old son, Jackson, and my 2.5-year-old daughter, Delilah. And this beautiful picture almost came crashing down last year. I was working as the head of HR at a global market research company and thought that this was going to be my destination job and ended up really struggling and being diagnosed with clinical depression. And so this whole beautiful picture almost came crashing down. And one of the major drivers of that depressed state for me was, a challenging disconnect with my relationship and experience with work. And I know I'm not alone in this sentiment as we hear some of the speakers talk today. The statistics that we're all pretty aware of around workforce engagement are startling, with the massive amount of people that aren't just connected meaningfully to this thing that we call work. And the way I viewed work, always being an HR practitioner, has been I'm the steward of the humanness or the humanity of the businesses that I work for. And it's been really challenging over the last 25 years to be in this role where we're both trying to hold fiduciary responsibility to the bottom line, to the shareholders of our organization, and we're trying to maintain some semblance of humanity in the way we interact with one another and the way we relate to our work. So this notion right now that something dramatically needs to change is upon us. And this is one of my favorite quotes, and I think sums up the work revolution pretty well. And this is by Khalil Gibran, the third most popular, most best-selling poet of all time behind Shakespeare and Lao Tzu. He says work is actually love made visible. And a quick note on the work revolution, it is just that. We are a bunch of revolutionaries that are committed to deeply, radically transforming the way we all experience work so that we can revolve the statistics, completely turn around the statistics of 70% in the US of the workforce not engaged with work. What if 70% of the workforce was engaged in work and really loved getting out of bed in the morning? So this is what we're going to be talking about today, is kind of this future of work. And we've got 3 amazing speakers with us today. Chuck Blakeman is going to be leading us off, followed by Jason Lauritsen. And finally, Pamela Potts will be joining us, and I'll be introducing them in a moment. If you are going to be tweeting or sharing any of this on social media, we'd ask that you use the hashtag #WorkShouldn'tSuck to get some buzz going around this. And we really think about today as the opportunity for us to really plant some seeds in this fertile ground that we have, in these tectonic shifts that are happening in the workplace, in workforce demographics, And really, you know, like work shouldn't suck. It should be life-giving, not life-sucking. And so today we're going to be talking about how might we sow the seeds of a future that we all love with respect to the way we relate to this thing we call work. So real quick, this is one of my favorite slides I use in a lot of my conversations. And I think this is maybe the underlying question that we're all kind of running around with all the time. And that is, what the hell is happening from moment to moment to moment? Well, fortunately, every year, Deloitte does this massive study about human capital trends happening around the world. And this year, they just came out with theirs. And here's what appears to be happening. It is abundantly clear that technology is advancing at lightning speed. We have seen incredible technological advancements in mobile and artificial intelligence, cognitive computing and sensors. And there's this massive gap between the technology advancements and business advancements and their ability to perform. This is creating tremendous stress, both in organizations, in society, and in the workforce overall. So we've got these multiple curves going on here. And we think now is an opportunity to really help close the gap among these different evolutionary curves of technology, individuals, businesses, and society at large. And the report further went on to state, and we tend to agree, that the solution exists somewhere in the way that we organize, manage, develop, and align people in this thing we call work. And top executives, as the survey went on, agreed. 88% of top leaders are saying that the organization of the future is important or very important topic for them as we face these radically shifting contexts in the world of work. And as our friend Charles Darwin has said, it's not necessarily the strongest of a species or the most intelligent of a species that survives, but rather the one that's most adaptable to change. So with that in mind, I would love to invite up our friend Chuck Blakeman. We're thrilled to have Chuck. He's a best-selling author, a world-renowned business advisor. Chuck rehumanizes businesses by giving everyone, as he likes to say, giving everyone their brain back. Be sure to check out Chuck's weekly Inc. magazine articles and his TED Talk on the emerging work world. Chuck's first book, Making Money is Killing Your Business, was named as a #1 business book of the year. And his newest book, Why Employees Are Always a Bad Idea, has been named the top 10 business book of the year. And both books can be found on Amazon. Chuck started and built 10 businesses in the last 25 years, both here in the US and internationally, and now uses his experience to help business owners and executives create their own success. His company, the Crankset Group, inspires and transforms your approach to business and your future. Chuck inspires leaders and provides simple tools to transform their business. And without further ado, I would love to introduce, and it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Mr. Chuck Blakeman.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you guys. I'm excited to do this with you. I'm going to jump right into my presentation. It looks like I have the same shirt on that my picture had. I actually have more than one shirt, but it's okay. Let's jump right in. All right, we've only got a few minutes to lay the foundation for a lot of things that are going to go on today. And I want to start with the idea of the emerging work world. Where is work going? I love that you started with those global trends things, because we're going to show you the emerging work world in the participation age. I didn't come up with this term, the participation age. I got it from a lot of other people out there who are using it for the last 10 years. But I believe it expresses probably most broadly what we're dealing with in the world today. Oops, hang on a second. There we go. #1, it's all broken. And I love that you showed this global trends survey, because we're going to show you in a second that that's true. Here's the other facts that show that it's all broken. Gallup puts out a survey every month. You can follow this stuff. The last month, 32% of the people at work were engaged. 68% were phoning it in. Pretty close to the 70% you mentioned, Kent. But wait, it gets worse. 51% of people right now, if you look at Gallup, 51% of the people in America have their resume on the street right now. And the last and the worst is that only 86% of people would rather be doing something else. Only 14% have found something they love doing. If you drop something else in their laps, they're gonna take it. So it's broken. And guess what? We intuitively know it's broken. And this goes to, I actually had last year's Global Human Capital Trends survey, and it's equally bad. After 3 years of struggling to drive employee engagement, retention, improve leadership, all that fun stuff, executives see a need to redesign the organization itself. The way we do work is fundamentally broken, with 92% of survey participants rating this as a critical priority. The new organization, as we call it, is driven around built around highly empowered teams. I think your stat, Ken, was 88%. It hasn't really changed in a year, and it's not likely to. We know it's broken. The data says it's broken. We intuitively know it. Let's see why it's broken. A few years ago, I read a blog post from a guy that made it clear that there's a new work world emerging, and his blog post went something like this. Every day when I get to work, I park my car, I leave myself in the car, and I go into work. At lunch, I always try to come back and reunite with myself for a few minutes before I have to leave myself in the car again and go back into work. I do this every day. And in the evenings, I always hope to get off in time to reunite with myself before I'm gone. What are you hearing there? What are you hearing? I do this with audiences, and you can just see people almost crying, the desperation in this guy's voice. What he's identified is that he's living at the intersection of two opposing and overlapping work worlds. The industrial age, which people think was over in the 1970s, is still strangely present in almost every front office of most companies, with guys in ties making decisions for everybody else. And that's colliding with the one that is emerging as the new standard for how we work, what we call the participation age. It's a really awkward pass-off. The time-worn practices of the factory system are colliding. For instance, in the back office, we've replaced industrial age assembly lines and smokestacks with nanotechnology in clean rooms. So we think the industrial age is over. But the front office looks just like it did in 1908. Guys in ties and suits making all the decisions. We know this is wrong. We know it's not working. And one of the best ways to know this is because Dilbert is funny. Dilbert should not be funny. We shouldn't get it. But it's based on this collision that we're seeing. The hallmarks of the participation age are really simple. Two things: participation and sharing. Companies are discovering that if they invite everyone to participate in the building of a great company and to share in the rewards, that both the company and the people will profit most. The participation age is changing everything, I think, and creating workplaces with a soul. This isn't woo-woo crap. This isn't fuzzy-wuzzy stuff. These are hardcore success strategies at work. And it's not a fringe idea, guys. I don't believe. I believe truly that the companies that embrace the kinds of things we're going to talk about today in the participation age will thrive, and those that don't will be left behind. So let's give you an example of what a participation age company looks like. Imagine a company with no departments, no corporate ladder, no promotions, no HR department, no written policies, just a few written principles or beliefs. And imagine maybe that company with even no managers, just a few leaders who lead because they've been chosen to lead, not because they have a title on the door. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine an office with a company with no office hours, even in manufacturing, with self-directed, self-managed teams of people who own the decisions they will have to carry out? They make their own decisions. There's no manager. They're self-managed. And then maybe imagine a company with unlimited vacation and profit sharing for everybody. The question would be, is it possible that this way of doing work could be better for both the company and the people who work there? I believe it could be. The idea here is that stakeholders are the future of business. It's not employees. Stakeholders want to make meaning, and in the past we had people who made money, and that was a problem. The good news is that we don't have to imagine this thing. Here's just a few dozen companies that are either already there and are operating just like I mentioned, or are racing there as fast as we can. In the upper left-hand corner, give you one example. There's the Morningstar Company, 4,000 people. They make tomato paste. Started in the late 90s. It's the largest tomato paste manufacturer in the world right now. And there's not a single manager in the whole place. Nobody could fire anybody. There's no hierarchy that is visible. There is a very simple hierarchy. There always is a little something. But the business isn't run on that. It's run on self-managed teams and adults who think like for themselves. These companies are springing up all around us in every size and in every industry. This isn't about big. It's not about small. These are just a small list of those that are racing in this direction as fast as they can. So what's wrong with business that the way we've inherited from the industrial age that makes these companies want to go somewhere else, and that 92% of companies know that what we're doing is broken? Here's a great example of that. Of all the reporters' questions, who, what, when, where, how, and why, which one of those is the most human? The one an animal would never ask. And the answer, of course, is why. Well, that's interesting, because what's the one question you have not been allowed to ask at work for over 100 years? The answer is why. Work was dehumanized when we made people into extensions of machines. If you ask why, you were challenging authority. You're a rebel. You're an outcast. You're a misfit. The system was designed to be run by a few geniuses, to be run by obedient and unquestioning childlike employees. But thankfully, in the emerging participation age, all that's changing. There's a sense of ownership that's coming out. To that end, managers who embrace control and authority are disappearing in favor of exponentially fewer leaders who embrace participation and sharing. And employees who are treated like children and rounded up and have to be supervised in daycare centers, office daycare centers, they're being replaced with stakeholders who function like self-motivated adults and are able to make their own decisions. They don't need to be managed. They just need to be led. The result is companies that will thrive. So let's talk about the difference. What's the difference between an employee and a stakeholder, and the difference between a manager and a leader? Because these are radical shifts in the way companies are going to have to do work and structure themselves going forward in order to survive. Employees come to work as extensions of machines. That's what we learned in the industrial age. Don't bring anything but that part of you. Stakeholders do just the opposite. They bring the whole, messy, creative person to work, and it's that messy part that makes your company better. Secondly, employees make money, and employees do what they're told, and stakeholders question everything. That's a really important distinction. In industrial age companies, and when I say industrial age, I mean 96% of all companies out there right now, because the front office still looks like it did in 1908. In those companies, stakeholders are considered annoying, but in emerging work world companies, they're embraced as incredibly valuable. And then lastly, employees need managed, and stakeholders need to be led. And there's a very big difference. So what's the difference between being managed and being led? Here's three fundamental, simple differences between managers and leaders. One of the problems with these two words is that over the last century, they've become so confused and so conflated that we don't even know there's a difference. They're radically different. I wrote an Inc. article last year, and the title of it was, Leaders and Managers Have Nothing in Common. Going forward, we're going to have companies who lead, and the great companies will not have managers at all. You will be self-managed. So here's the difference. Managers, number one, first is that they solve and decide. We call it managers telling. So managers tell. They solve and decide, and they tell people what to do. Leaders do the opposite. They ask. Managers tell, leaders ask, and leaders train by asking. So managers solve and decide, leaders train by asking, and then leaders get out of the way. I'm sure you would all say that you've had a manager and they never got out of the way. Leaders train you, they trust you, and they get out of the way. Secondly, managers focus on process. How we get stuff done, frankly, is many times more important than what got done. Leaders do just the opposite. They focus on results. Let's agree together on what results you're going to get. And if we both agree that that result is the right one, how you get there, as long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, is up to you. Get your brain back in gear and get after it. Thirdly, this is really important and very subtle. Managers focus on tasks and they delegate tasks. Put this nut on that bolt. Write this line of code. But it's telling. And when you delegate tasks, the problem with that is you make people feel used. Leaders do the opposite. They delegate responsibility. It's not put this nut on this bolt, it's make a great washing machine. It's not write this line of code. It's let's work together to build something incredible. And it's about the end result. The key difference here is when you talk about responsibility, you give people responsibility, that allows them to make decisions. Decisions create ownership, and ownership is the most powerful motivator in business. Ownership will make you take responsibility for your own, you know what. I'd like to have a dog like this, but you know, we wish we had stakeholders like this who would take responsibility. Well, they will if you give them responsibility. Give them ownership, and ownership is the most powerful motivator in business. One quick last thing that will help you see the difference between leadership and management as we move forward in developing different cultures. Here's my two definitions of those two. You can see a radical difference. Leadership is any act that improves the life, situation, or performance of another individual. With that definition in mind, every single person in your company can be a leader. David Marquette took the worst rated submarine in the entire U.S. Navy and in 1 year turned it into the best rated submarine in the entire U.S. Navy. And here's the kicker. He did it with the same 134 people that had made it the worst. And he did it with one simple act. He got everybody together and he said, the tradition here is manager, follower. You do what you're told. Today, I'm telling you, all 134 of you are leaders, and it is now leader, leader. I will lead you in the things I'm good at. You'll lead me in the things you're good at. We're all going to be leaders. And the question I would have for any of you here today with this definition, is there anybody in the world who couldn't be a leader? Anybody can do an act or do something that improves the life situation and performance of another individual. That is leadership in its purest form. Here's management in its purest form. The use of power and authority to command and control for the benefit of the manager. I got a great slide that says it's a manager sticking his head into somebody's office, and he says, don't forget, Bob, I need to take credit for your report by 3:30. That's management. It's the use of power and authority for command and control for the benefit of the manager. So you can see a radical difference between these two. This one makes my life better, and this one makes the manager's life better or the company's life better. It uses me, and this one serves me. Let's look at a company that's done this stuff. Well, let's take a look at one example of a participation age company. Semco, they're a Brazilian company, $3 billion, $1 to $2 billion company, 10,000 or 3,000 people, founded in 1952. In the 1980s, Ricardo Semler re-engineered this as a early stage participation age company. And he did it on two assumptions. And this is one of the hallmarks of the participation age. In the industrial age, you work on policies, and you focus on policies and manuals and employee manuals, all that kind of crap. In a participation age company, you run on principles. He threw out all the policies and all the manuals, and he redesigned the company around two simple principles. First, trust in adult behavior. This is the critical assumption that people actually want to be productive and want to contribute to something bigger. And number two, everyone has their own work rhythms as to how, when, where, and how they do their best work. So what kind of company did he build around these two very simple assumptions? Well, what he did was to begin with, he reduced 12 layers of management to 3 circles. Really, it's not even layers, it's 3 circles of leadership and influence. And those leaders are leaders because people follow them, not because they're appointed. Managers have reports. Leaders have followers. And so they don't have anybody who has a manager title. If people are following you, then they sort of bless that and say you're a leader. And when people stop following you, you're no longer in those leadership roles. You are a different kind of leader. Stakeholders at Semco now work in self-organized teams. Oh, and there's no titles or management ladder. He said, you're never going to get promoted here. Let's all come in at the top, and we'll make more money by making greater contributions, each one of us. They all live on self-organized, self-managed teams. The big misperception here is that self-organized work has no management. That's not true. It's just self-management. We manage ourselves. We don't need a manager. The people make their own decisions about productivity, pay, who leads the team, who gets to keep their job. The team's hire, the team's fire. There's no manager to involve in the process because they don't exist at Semco. And this is how we run our companies as well, I might say that. There are no set work hours at Semco. This is a manufacturing company, and the pods get together and decide when they should make washing machines, and they make better washing machines faster with higher productivity than anybody else in South America. This is a cool one. All meetings are optional at Semco. They are at our company as well. Imagine how many useless meetings would go away, ineffective meetings would go away on their own if we just adopted this rule. Unlimited vacation. When we first put this in place, we had to start pushing people out the door because they start taking too much responsibility. But if your work's done, go. And we have the phrase, it's really unlimited vacation every day. If you're done with your work, go home. Semco also has, they also have profit sharing for everybody. And this is a key to the participation age. You can't ask people to just participate and not share. Those are the two hallmarks. And the hypocrisy in engagement these days is that companies want you to be more engaged so that they can run off with more profit. You guys smell that, and so there's no interest in being more engaged. It's both and. Really interesting thing here that Ricardo said. He said, I didn't start this company to get freedom from the time clock or the cube or the bureaucracy. He said he did it for this one reason and this one reason only, so that everybody who works there could find their own personal destiny. I mean, that sounds like a load of woo-woo crap. So how did he do in building a company that focused on humanity instead of the work itself? In the worst 10-year recession in Brazil's history, revenues grew by 600%, profits were up 500%, productivity rose 700%, and employee turnover was 1% to 2%. Here's a great example of a participation age leader. This is Ricardo talking about his sales force. We don't want to see your expense report, how many holidays you're taking, or even where you work. Let's agree you sell 57 widgets per week. If you sell them by Wednesday, please go to the beach and start again on Monday. It's great. Again, here's all these companies that are doing this. He's not alone. We're on there as well. I can find you hundreds of smaller ones that are doing this. Here's how the data works. The average company grows 12% a year. Good to great companies grow 31%. And these participation age companies grow 1,000% or 100% a year. Over 10 years, it's 1,000%, 4 times faster than good to great, and 10 times faster than the average. If you want to make more money, focus on people. Here's an example of a firm that was focusing on structure, and after they finished, they focused on people. Their revenues tripled. They broke through in incredible ways. Here's another one, very small company that decided from the beginning to become a participation age company. For 4 or 5 years, they mucked around at $150,000 to $180,000 a year with 2.5 people. 4 years later, it's a $4.5 million company, and the owner runs it from Denver, and she lives in Washington. She lives in Denver, and the business is in Washington, D.C. Let me give you real quick as I finish up here. Here's what the old one looked like. Here's what the new emerging work world looks like. Stakeholder leaders. Everybody on the team, each one of these blue dots is a stakeholder leader team. And you have floating stakeholders who work with each other. On a micro scale, here's what a manager used to do. He used to help all these employees, and now these employees are stakeholders, and stakeholder leaders, they take the things that used to matter from a stakeholder leader or from a manager, and they do those things themselves. They become self-managed. The question here is, in a self-managed environment, this is a great example of what an emerging work world organizational design looks like. Who's in charge here? And the answer is the guy with the ball. Who's in charge here? And the answer is whoever gets to the ball first. Leader, leader. If you see that the copier is broken, if you see that there's a new initiative that needs to be happening, if you see some poor quality, whatever you see, call a meeting, and if people show up, guess what? You're the leader, and we've got a new team. That team may last for 3 weeks, it may last for 3 years, but whoever gets to the ball first is the leader. Here's some of the things that you need to do to change out the old way. What you don't want to go back to, you don't want to go back to your companies and say, you're all now stakeholders, I'll be on the golf course. What you want to do is replacements. All the things that managers used to do, you want to replace those with things like peer-reviewed kudos programs, peer-developed mapping of their processes, peer-developed metrics, peer-developed surveys. We use these internally. We survey each other, and our pay actually comes from how we survey each other. Results-based incentives from the peers. And then we do commitment letters around all these things where we commit to each other that we will be adults and we'll actually do what we're saying. Other things like 2-step decision-making, 4-step training, we don't have time to get into. I can tell you that in the participation age, you will hire very differently. You do not hire for skills and experience. You hire for culture, talent, and beliefs. All right, let me leave you with a couple memorable things. The art of leadership is to know how few decisions the leader needs to make. I put that in my second book 4 or 5 years ago, and then I found this from Jack Dorsey last year. When I'm making decisions, I am not leading. That's a great leadership statement. Leaders train other people, then they get the heck out of the way. Let's not have people leaving themselves in the car. That's my finishing message here. This may be a trapeze moment for you if you've heard this kind of stuff for the first time. If you run a business that's a traditional business, or you feel like you're stuck in a job with no soul, then you might have a decision to make. There's a few dozen giant corporations out there and hundreds of big ones and tens of thousands of small ones we know of that are already there, racing to embrace their participation age, are already there. I would encourage you, don't settle. Find one you can join as a stakeholder or build one yourself. The emerging work world is waiting for you. Please come join us in the participation age. Thanks. All right, I think we've got time for some questions here. I'll turn this thing off. And
yeah.
Ken?
Hey, Chuck, thanks so much. We did have a couple questions coming in. Really appreciate this perspective and the energy that I feel from you coming towards this. And
It's a passion.
Happen. Yeah, it clearly is. So thanks for modeling that. The first, it's more of a comment from Benjamin. He's mentioning the historical struggle between Frederick Taylor and Deming in most organizations. Do you have any reflections or comments on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, Peter Drucker said Frederick Winslow Taylor had as much impact on the 20th century as Freud, Darwin, and Marx. And nobody knows who this guy is. He made 2 fatal assumptions about the employee, 2 fatal definitions. Number 1, employees are stupid. Here's a quote from his paper in 1911. The average employee is so stupid, they more resemble the ox than any other type. The second fatal assumption he made was that they're lazy. He called it soldiering. Well, if people are stupid and lazy, how do you fix that? Well, you find a few smart and motivated ones, you lord them over the stupid and lazy ones, and thus management was born. Think about that. This is the roots of management, is this fatal assumption that you're stupid and lazy, and I can't trust you as far as I can drop kick you. So, yeah, there's an incredible, that was an incredibly convenient thing. Taylor actually had a lot of good things he did, but it was overridden by that one thing. The industrialists look at that and said, well, see, people are just oxes. We can treat them like extensions of machines, and off we go. They ran with that. And so that colored the next 100 years of how we treated people. They became extensions of machines, lost their brains, and it's okay because they're dumb and lazy anyway. They deserve it. So, yeah, and then Deming comes along and says, no, you can actually trust them to do their own quality control and that stuff. There's a whole raft of reasons why people haven't adopted this yet. Number 1 is what Bill Gore said in 1967. He developed Gore-Tex, the company that makes the great Gore-Tex, 10,000 people, $3 billion company. He said in 1967 that the allure of authoritarian leadership, management is just irresistible. It's so easy because I told you so. But he says, but the problem with this is it's dehumanizing. So you have your choice, and we're seeing the results. The fun thing is all the data is on the side of Deming and self-management and those kinds of stuff. When you give people their brains back, your company will make more money. It's not taking hold yet, again, because change is hard for everybody. And this is working for the guy at the top, or at least he thinks it is. What he doesn't understand is their company would make more money if you went the other direction. But what I hear a lot of times is, well, we're here, and if we do this self-management thing, we're going to take a dip before we go up. I've never seen it happen. Every company where we introduce it correctly, they start to immediately go up. Every metric goes up.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for riffing on that, Chuck. You know, it is fascinating, this disbelief that exists in some of the traditional way that leaders run their organizations. And a question from Tiffany came in related to that. I guess she saw you speak at the Climbing Wall Association Summit in May. And she's offering that resistance to this topic really comes from the baby boomer and kind of the traditionalist generation. Yeah. So how can you just said something like the way we position this in properly? Like, what does that look like? How do we discuss this with
one strategy is just wait for the baby boomers to die. That's going to take another 10 to 20 years. So that's not, 30 years. That's not a great one. I really believe that millennials, I didn't have time to say this, but this idea of making meaning is not a baby boomer or a millennial thing. You do the research and you find out everybody actually wants to go to work to make meaning. The difference is I grew up in the shadow of the industrial age, and my parents taught me, shut up, sit down, don't make waves, live invisibly, and go out quietly with a gold watch. And millennials didn't grow up with that shadow over them. They grew up in an environment where we're at the top of Maslow's hierarchy right from birth now. It's like, okay, what can I do to leave a legacy, to make meaning? Yeah. And so they're not going to put up with this. So I'm depending on some baby boomers to figure this out as they see the data. And then the overwhelming majority of millennials are being freed as they hear this message, because they know intuitively what they were doing was the wrong thing.
Mm. Yeah.
So stay tuned. I think that's why I say I think in the next 10 to 20 years, it could be as minimal as 5. And certainly in 10 to 20 years, this is all going to be a big duh. We're not going to be managing companies the way we used to, because the data, altruistically and the data in any direction, this wins.
Yeah. Thank you. Very cool. We have time for a couple more questions, I think. A couple are coming in. Someone here is asking, I guess they're referring to your previous book title. What do you mean when you say employees are always a bad idea?
Yeah, well, you saw it in the talk. The root of the word employee has to do with where labor came from in the early mid-1700s on. The first factories were staffed by orphans and poor children who were bought from their parents. And they gave them 12 hours a day of work, 6 days a week, and fed them porridge, and that was their pay. That went on in many factories all the way to 1859 for 70 plus years. That is our legacy of the concept of employee. That, along with Taylor saying people are stupid and lazy, it's not a concept that we can rehabilitate because it never had a good start. So we have to start over. I don't care if you call them associates, members, staff, anything but employee. Employee is a 4-letter word. It is an N word, and we should never use it again because of that. So employees are a bad idea. Stakeholders are an incredible idea.
Yeah, awesome. So with that in mind, how would one go about starting or to creating a stakeholder-driven company from scratch?
Yeah, the first thing is your mindset. We don't understand how subtly this stuff has poisoned us over the last 150 years. We would never say other people are stupid and lazy. We would just say we're slightly more smart and motivated, or slightly more experienced or more knowledgeable. And so I have to tell you what to do. And so we've got to start with what we believe. I say this all the time. You don't create a culture. You simply live out what you believe. If you are living out in a culture that's a top-down pyramid scheme, it's because that's what's in your head. If you change what's in your head, it will come out differently in your life. So start with what's in your head. Read things. Watch the TED Talks, mine and Doug Kirkpatrick's and a number of others, in my book and Doug's book and David Marquette's book called Turn the Ship Around, and others like that. And get your head straight first. And then the second thing you do is you go to everyone and you announce, here's what it's going to look like when we're done. And then the third thing you say is, relax. We're not going to try and do that this week.
It takes some time.
The worst of human conditions is uncertainty. That's why the hostage situation is the worst thing in humanity. Well, if you tell everybody you're no longer employees, you're now all stakeholders, and we're removing all the managers, what you've done is create a vacuum of uncertainty. What we showed in that list of things at the end, kudos programs and incentives programs, we add one thing at a time that they actually want to get on board with because it gets them working with each other instead of with some manager. We add one thing at a time to the point where they look around at some point and say, why is the manager still here? And the manager looks around and says, why am I still here? I can go be a leader. I can do something else in the company that will make me more effective. So it's really agile. People like this agile stuff. Agile's been around since Mary Parker Follett talked in 1926 about how you make decisions. It's not a new thing, but minimum viable product. Let's find if your company has, say, 100 people in it, then you find the 15 that are willing, and you do a minimum viable product with them who are the smallest world possible, with the people who love you the most. You try this out. You give it a test case. Don't go out and try and convince everybody. Just say, this is what it's going to look like when we're done. And we're going to start with these 12 people over here, and you can watch them for 6 months. And then you see the naysayers begin to get on board as they become fully engaged in the process.
Yeah, nice. So with that in mind, maybe last question here and we'll move on. I've heard the sentiment, it has to start with the CEO. Is that true?
Absolutely. I had a company with 400 people call me, and the CEO said, hey, I watched your TED Talk and I'd like this to happen in my business. And I said, well, it doesn't happen in your business. It happens in your head. And so if it's not happening in your head, we're going to have to do something with your head. So I said, the first thing I have to do is come out and talk to your leadership team and spend a half a day or a couple hours at least with you guys and ask you some hard questions about what you believe about work. It's not cultural beliefs. So what do you believe about work and business and people and money and success? And what are your definitions? What are you working with? What's your palette of beliefs that you're working with? Let's figure that out. And then we'll see what aligns with where the world's going and what is dragging you down. Because I guarantee you there's nothing wrong with your business. The business simply reflects what's in your head. If you don't like what's in your business, then fix your head. So then we get back into working with them on the tools. We do both. We'll help you figure out how to get the principles of the participation age in your head. And then the practices, tools, and the methodologies are things we've worked out over the last many years, 10 years, 15 years of running our own company this way and helping other companies do that for even longer.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Chuck. We'll have you back on later for the panel Q&A.
Sounds good.
If you wanna get in touch with Chuck, you can catch him on @ChuckBlakeman on Twitter or chuckblakeman.com in case you have more questions, and we'll bring Chuck back up later with the other panelists.
Awesome. Thanks so much,
Chuck. Yep.
I'm out.
Out. Excellent. So thank you so much, Chuck. Awesome. We're gonna move on to our next amazing speaker here. It's my honor and privilege to introduce Jason Lauritsen. Jason is an employee engagement and workplace culture expert who loves to challenge the way you think and invite you to think differently. He's a former corporate HR exec, and he's dedicated his career to helping leaders build organizations that are good for both people and profits. He's the co-author of the book called Social Gravity, and some people may know him as the tall dancing guy with Talent Anarchy. I'll leave that one for you to describe, Jason, but thanks so much for being here with us today. The floor is yours, my friend. And you're on mute.
Turns out if I turn on my mute, it works a lot better. Thanks, Kent. I appreciate that. You are doing a stellar job, by the way. I appreciate you being here and sort of guiding us through this. I also want to say that, I always appreciate that Chuck teased me up. Hopefully he won't be too upset with me, but I am going to use the word employee because that's the word that we use today. Hopefully he'll forgive me for that. Much of my work is built around that. That's what, so I am going to use that, hopefully not be too offensive to anyone. I get the point completely, but hopefully maybe we can reclaim what the word means and reframe and make it our own in a different context.
I'm going to butt in and say, I love that. Let's reframe it.
Let's do it. I was told recently that when I am wearing my headset, I look like a telemarketer. So, make of that what you will today. But I am thrilled that you are here. I'm thrilled that you've joined us today. I'm thrilled that we are here talking about, that work shouldn't suck. And I think we as panelists, certainly Chuck and Kent and Pam and I are all sort of very passionate about this because we believe work shouldn't suck. But I am like filled with both gratitude and energy that you have joined us today on this event, and that there's people out there that share this conviction and that are wanting to do this work. And so I think part of the reason we're so passionate is because work does suck for so many people. We all know it, we feel it, we have conversations with friends and relatives and even some of the people that work in the places we work about how painful their work experience is. And what I hope to do today is maybe shine a light on, maybe in addition to Chuck's presentation, shine a light on why this is happening fundamentally, and then talk about what we could start doing. Whereas sort of Chuck is looking, sort of talking a lot about sort of organizationally and the organizational upheaval. And one of the things I got to thinking about that is like, what if I'm not in a position to sort of make that change? I think where you'll find that my stuff maybe fits in is, hey, listen, if your organization can't get all the way to being a participation age company right now, it's going to take some time. What can we do in the interim to make work a better experience, to make it more meaningful for the folks that show up every day? And that starts with understanding initially that one of our most powerful drives as human beings is for connection with other humans. I mean, I think we can see that everywhere we look. I think we can see that in if you just look around. I mean, why else would there be 18 gazillion people on Facebook if we didn't crave that belonging and connection with other people? And that doesn't stop when we go to work, right? We take that desire for connection and that need for connection and belonging to work with us. For 3 years, I had the privilege to lead the Best Places to Work team at Quantum Workplace. And what that meant is that we got the opportunity to collect data from thousands of organizations every year as part of Best Places to Work programs all across the United States, hundreds of thousands of employee survey responses. And each year we had the chance to take that data and we would essentially do a macro analysis on it. We'd crunch it and look at sort of what was bubbling up as being most strongly correlated or looking like it was most strongly correlated and driving overall employee satisfaction and engagement. And we did that during the time I was there. They've been doing this report at Quantum for a number of years. And the interesting thing that you start to see when we started to look at this year over year is that it was sort of the same things that bubbled up every year. There's things like, at the top of this list were things like employees always said, or it sort of showed up that it was important that they feel valued. Trust was a big driver. They wanted to feel cared for. They wanted to feel appreciated, right? And I don't think that's surprising. You can see those same results in sort of any data that you go look at, even the Gallup data, the Great Place to Work Institute data. It all sort of reinforces these same kinds of things as important. And so when you look at that, you start to realize that it really reflects our need for human connection. And it turns out, I think this screams pretty loudly that for most people, work absolutely is about more than a paycheck. In fact, for employees, work is a relationship. I'd like you to think for a moment about maybe one of the most important relationships in your life, whether it's your spouse or your life partner or your best friend, with that person in mind. And I want you to think about when that relationship is working really well, when it's healthy and positive, how does it make you feel? Like, how does that relationship make you feel? Chances are, if I had you jot it down, you'd start writing down things like the list that I just showed you, things like you feel valued and appreciated and cared for and trusted. You know that someone is, encouraging your growth and supporting your growth. You have an advocate, right? All of those things, we would describe that out of work in contexts like love and those sort of things. But at work, we call it something different because we don't use the 4-letter L word at work very often. But that's really what it's about. So it turns out that the reality is that work is a relationship for employees, and they experience it, and we experience it. We show up with the same expectations of work that we do of any other important relationship in our life. And I think this is fundamental to understanding why employee engagement is so low and why our work experiences suck so bad in so many places. And that's, I think, when we have to step back and understand how we view work and how we experience work. Most employers today still view work as a contract with the employee. And I think this builds upon a lot of what Chuck has talked about. This is a spillover of the industrial era. But most organizations still view it as a contract. As an employer, I pay the employee for their work product, and the employee's job is to give me their time and energy and work in return. It's a very transactional, contractual relationship. And when you look at our HR systems, when you look at how we have built systems to manage people, most of those systems are built around ensuring compliance with that contract. Think about performance management, for example, or performance appraisals, or job descriptions and that sort of thing. And you start to understand that this is all about making sure that the organization gets their money's worth. But this is a really, really terrible way to approach relationship building. I mean, can you imagine being in a marriage like this, where you're married to someone who rarely ever tells you that they love you or that they appreciate you or shows you any real affection, but frequently reminds you of how well you are fulfilling your sort of contractual obligations to them as a spouse? Right? If some of you are in that marriage, I apologize for bringing it up. I didn't mean to bring up a sore subject, but the point is that's a really terrible way of maintaining a relationship, and it's a recipe for divorce. But yet that is the day-to-day reality of a vast majority of employees out there. And so it shouldn't be surprising to us that, that employees that are leaving our organization going in search of a better relationship. And so here's the thing, we're stuck in this decades-long cycle of disengagement, and it is at the root of it is the fact that the way that we think about work is broken, right? We're using a broken model. The employees never signed on to this psychological contract that we're trying to enforce. And in order to make progress, in order to really get to a place where we create workplaces that feel good and where engagement's sustainable, we've got to tear up that contract, and we have to find a different model. And I think to do that, what the data suggests is that we need to start thinking about and understanding that work is a relationship for employees. And if we're going to build great workplaces, we need to start designing the work experience as a relationship. And we need to start thinking about how we design it through the lens of what makes for a healthy relationship. And once we start to understand that, we can start building those things into the whole cycle of the employee experience, from the courtship of recruiting through to the day-to-day interactions we have with our peers and our leaders and managers. And so thankfully for us, there's a whole field, and there's decades of research that's been done by academics and psychologists and counselors into what makes for a healthy relationship. And sort of understanding the different elements and the different things that make for a healthy relationship between human beings. And so what I'm going to break down for you with the rest of my time is I'm going to go through sort of what a model for a healthy relationship can look like, and help to start prime you in thinking about what might this look like if we started designing this into our how we design and think about and manage work. And that starts with the first element of a healthy relationship is appreciation. And we as human beings, and we all know this and relate to this, we crave acknowledgement, we crave validation, we need to feel seen and valued, and we need to know that we matter. And let's be honest, we're not very good at this in the workplace. In fact, I would say we're fairly terrible at this. You go clear back to 2 decades ago, or almost 2 decades ago, when Gallup published the book, How Full Is Your Bucket? Part of the reason they put that book out was because they had research from their employee surveys that suggested that 2/3 of employees that they were surveying were saying that they perceived receiving 0 positive recognition in the previous year. So you had employees that are feeling for the last 12 months that there were exactly 0 moments in their work experience. And you think about the number of hours they're spending at work, 0 moments where they were acknowledged or appreciated or felt some sort of positive recognition moment. And in our relationship with our employer, we need to know that our work is seen. Appreciation isn't just about sort of positive recognition. If you look at sort of the definition, it's also about acknowledgement, about being seen. And just the simple act of acknowledging that another, that you notice another's work or another's impact is important. I think in our organizations, we talk about that 65% number they found in Gallup. That sort of makes sense because we do a really good job of recognizing our top performers, but we generally then overlook the vast majority of our employees who are average, who show up every day, that put in a good effort, they do a good job, they do the best they can, their work product is average, and they go back home at the end of the day and they feel like nobody even noticed that they were there. And so in order to really express appreciation, we need to make sure that employees feel acknowledged, they feel seen, they feel validated every day, not just when their work is deemed extra important or when they go above and beyond, but particularly on the days where they're having a tough time or they're struggling. Like, we need to know that we matter. And so a healthy relationship starts with appreciation. Second is acceptance. And I think to think about this, it's helpful to think about maybe your relationship with the person that you would consider to be your best friend. If I were to ask you to describe your relationship with your best friend, one of the things that you would probably say is that you can really be yourself with that person, right? They accept you sort of warts and all, right? They've seen the good, they've seen the bad, they've probably even seen some of the ugly, and yet they still love you and embrace you and encourage you, and they don't try to change you or judge you. That's part of what makes for a really great, strong relationship. And I think in order to create a really healthy relationship at work, we need to create the same kind of feeling. We need to create a place where employees can show up as they are. This is what Chuck was talking about with the guy that feels like he leaves himself in his car, right? We need to create places where he can bring himself from his car into the workplace and feel accepted and embraced, and that the workplace will meet and accept him for who he is, not who they wish he was or who they want him to be, that they create that really sort of accepting environment. And so that's a really important second element, is we have to create and design for acceptance. Next is communication, and I would suspect that it's of no surprise to anyone today. Communication is not, when we bring up communication as important as a part of a relationship or as part of a engagement at work, we talk about communication a lot. I've done a lot of employee surveys. I've looked at a lot of employee survey data over the years. I have yet to see one where employees say that communication is going above and beyond, or that, hey, we need to back off on communication, because communication, there's always room for more. And here's why, and Chuck actually alluded to this. This is part of human nature. Give you an example. How many of you, I'm sure, have been on the other end of that email that maybe comes from your boss? You get at 10 o'clock in the morning, you get an email from your boss that says, hey, I need to see you today sometime before you leave. Doesn't give you any other context, doesn't give you any other detail. When you get that, or even if you haven't gotten that, but you imagine getting that, even if you have a great relationship with your boss, when you get that and you don't know what it's about, we don't assume like, oh, sweet, I'm getting a raise, or I'm finally getting that promotion, right? That's not where our brain goes. Our brain goes to, what did I do? Am I in trouble? Am I going to get fired? Like, we go to all these crazy places. Or like, if you have a loved one or a child who lives with you, let's say, and they're supposed to be home at 8 o'clock, and it comes to be 8:30 and they're not home and they haven't called, what do we assume is happening? I mean, we assume that they were in a car wreck and they're in a ditch somewhere or whatever. We assume some pretty bad things, and that's hardwired into us as humans. It's part of our sort of evolved survival mechanism, which is when we don't know the details, when we are uncertain, we fill in the details, and when we fill in the details, we don't write great stories, we write negative stories. And this is because, I mean, if you think about historically as human beings, if you're, back 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, if you're walking through, or even today, I guess, if you're walking through the woods and it's dark and you hear a sound, you don't know what it is, it's a good idea to assume that's something coming to eat you and run like hell, right? That's the instinct we should have when it comes to survival. The problem is that kicks in also with communication. When we don't know the story, we fill in the story, and we fill in the worst possible story because that prepares us to survive assuming something bad's going to happen. And so this is why one of the things that I sort of preach relentlessly about engagement is that uncertainty is your enemy. If you remember 3 words from my presentation today that could change your results, it's these 3 words. Uncertainty kills engagement. By the way, uncertainty also kills relationships. I mean, think about being in a relationship or a romantic relationship where you were uncertain about the other person's commitment or their interest in you, right? That doesn't make for the strongest relationship. Uncertainty is the enemy here. And so the role of communication, both in healthy relationships and creating that feeling of a healthy relationship at work, is to really reduce uncertainty and create clarity, because clarity fuels strong relationships. Our next element is support. When we're in a healthy relationship, we hold each other in positive regard, which means that we choose to see the other person's failure as maybe a tough break or as a result of some bad circumstances or just luck, right? Bad luck, instead of assuming that it's a character flaw, right? We also tend to assume positive intention of the other person. So if they do something we don't understand or seems out of character, we always assume that there's a positive intention or something behind that. However, we can all probably recall the difference between being in a relationship at work where you felt like you didn't have that kind of support and what that felt like, where maybe your boss always assumed that you weren't, we talked about the Frederick Taylor, that assumed that you were lazy or assumed that you were stupid or assumed that you were, out to no good, versus what it feels like when you do have that support. It's a dramatically different experience in terms of your own experience as an employee, how much energy you have, your performance, your impact, all of those things. And so creating that feeling of support, making sure that we have that between peers, between employees and managers, between leaders and the employees, that can create a tremendous sense of safety, psychological safety in particular, and freedom for employees to take risks, to stretch, to go beyond their comfort zone and to perform at another level. The 5th element of a healthy relationship is commitment. And this breaks down basically in there's 2 different levels to commitment that I think are really important. One is that a healthy relationship requires reciprocity, meaning that both parties in the relationship are committed to working towards the happiness and well-being of the other person in the relationship. They're committed to seeing the other person be happy and successful and do well. And so this also sort of implies a shared and mutual accountability, right? That I understand your expectations of me, you understand my expectations of you, we clarify those things, and then we are in good faith working to meet those expectations to the best of our abilities, right? We want each other to be successful. There's a bond in that. But commitment is also about how do we fix when things go wrong, right? So, for example, with my wife and I have what I think is an amazing, healthy relationship. And most of the time, everything works very well. But that doesn't mean that once in a while, when we're tired or stressed, we don't have some kind of argument. And that can feel like really terrible. Like for me, I hate it when we argue. It feels gross, and those emotions are just overwhelming. And so thankfully, over the course of our time together, we've learned how to quickly sort of repair and deal with those hurt feelings and call them out and fix those so that they don't linger. They don't become something that sticks around and taints the relationship. This has to happen at work as well. And I think this is one thing we do really poorly. And it requires an ongoing conversation either between an employee and manager, employee and leader, or employee and peers. But we need to be in constant communication to call out those things so that when something is a little bit off or we have a fracture in the relationship, that we can repair that quickly. So this is what a model of a healthy relationship can look like. And I think our opportunity here as leaders, as HR practitioners, is to think about how can we start to think differently about designing the employee experience, designing how we train and develop maybe managers and leaders around how do we make sure that employees feel like this relationship is healthy. And I'm guessing if you're sitting out there and you're listening to this and maybe your organization isn't quite there yet, you're immediately thinking about a barrier that exists, which is probably, I could call it a sixth element, and that is time. Right? This is the pushback, like, well, our managers just don't have time, or we just don't have time for this, right? You don't have time to invest in relationship. We're very busy. And, I think this is a really important thing to talk about. Partly because, well, it became, I recognized its importance a few years ago when, for another presentation I was working on, out of curiosity, I asked my then 7-year-old daughter how she knows if someone loves her. Pretty simple question, and kids will tell you the truth. And so the first thing she said to me, she looked at me and she thought about it for a second. The first thing she said was lots of hugs and kisses. Now, I'm not recommending that necessarily as a workplace strategy. I mean, you got to figure that out. A lot of people have gotten in trouble for that. So I'm not recommending that. That's just the first thing she said. It's the second thing she said that was really important, and that was they spend time with me, right? Because even as a 7-year-old, we understand that adults make time for the things that are important to them. We make time. And so there's no way around this. We have to create and make time to build the relationships, to invest with our employees. That means managers have to make more time to spend with their people, right? Building relationship, being in relationship. Leaders need to spend more time communicating and thinking about culture. We need to create more space for employees to be together with other employees to form relationships and friendships, right? There is no shortcut to a strong relationship that doesn't include time. So we have to create time. So as I wrap up, I want to give you one sort of hack or shortcut to all of this, because this can feel really overwhelming. It's hard to know where to start. Here's the hack I'll share with you. I call it the relationship test. And here's how it works. Very simply is, if you think about your workplace or you think about what's happening at work, take any particular management practice or interaction or approach that you use. You take that approach and you think, how would this go if it was my significant other or my best friend on the other side of it? Or another way to apply it is, like, how would this go if I applied it in my personal life? The same approach in my personal life. So, for example, how would your best friend feel if you applied sort of the traditional performance appraisal process to them? Right? How would they feel about you sort of randomly once a year showing up with a bunch of stored up sort of resentment feedback data to dump on them all at once about how they could be a better friend for you? Right? How would that go over? Chances are that, the question of the relationship test is, does it build relationship or does it hurt relationship? And if it builds relationship, then you're probably doing something okay. If it hurts relationship, that's a fail, and it means you need to start over. Well, I would guess that your best friend's probably not going to love that approach. In fact, your best friend's probably not going to like getting critical feedback from you in general. I mean, it depends on your friends, it depends on your relationship. But the point is, fail of the relationship test means now I have to step back and say, well, okay, how could I do performance appraisal, or what I need to accomplish through a performance appraisal, in a way that builds relationship? And if you can answer that question, you will start to accelerate your processes towards creating a more healthy relationship, and also creating more sustainable, engaging work experience and environment. So you can use this on any number of things, but the relationship test is a quick way to sort of explore what's working and what's not when it comes to helping the relationship strengthen with employees. So here's the bottom line, right? This is the key. If we're going to solve this riddle that is employee engagement and why it sucks and why work sucks for so many people, it's about realizing this. Work is a relationship for employees, not a contract. And until we start treating it appropriately, we're going to continue to be stuck in this hamster wheel of low engagement into the future. So with that, I think I will wrap up and invite Kent to join me again, and let me stop my share.
Hey, Jason, nice job. Great content there. Really appreciate this perspective. It brings me, and there are some questions coming in, and I just want to offer a comment. What you're saying to me is pinging off of a number of different quotes or perspectives that I've heard throughout my career. One, this importance of the conversation or the dialogue. I had a mentor of mine once say that the conversation is the relationship. And so if
Absolutely.
we unpack that, and if the conversation is about time and money, that's not a relationship. That's just a transaction, right?
Right.
If the conversation's about how are you feeling, how are you doing, how can I help, like, we use conversation as a means to establish that sense of relationship. The other thing that was coming up for me is from Ram Charan, who wrote an HBR article years ago about culture and put forth this notion that dialogue is the fundamental unit of work.
Mm.
And so to have people engaged, needing to be seen and heard, I love how you said that. That currency is an exchange of conversation and dialogue. So
It absolutely
I
is.
love what you're offering here, brother. Really, really nice. So a question that came up with respect to this, and you started to touch on it, communication can be challenging sometimes if our only lens or only view coming into the conversation is seeing the problems. Like if we can't see our way towards what the solution might be, what are some concrete steps we can take if we're just so mired in the problem state? Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. Is it that the problem state being that there's so much to talk about, there's so much stuff, there's such a big overwhelming problem that we're just not sure where to start? You
Could
think?
be. Yeah, it could be. My sense is, so as I was hearing this question, just to kind of help this along, as we come into these challenges when we're tired or we're stressed, a lot of times we're not at our best. We're being controlled by some fix it or hero kind of mentality or victim
Sure.
or some perpetrator. So is that really ever going to be a constructive conversation if we're coming from this place of not true self?
Got it. One of the things I would recommend is, I think when you're in that situation and you're trying to build a relationship, it's and I think I think probably if we reflect on this in our personal relationships, this is also true. It's important to start with like, hey, let's talk about like, how are we doing? Where are you at? How you feeling today? Right. And let's talk about the fact that this feels overwhelming and I'm stressed and I'm burned out, because I'm bringing all of that stuff to that conversation and that relationship, regardless of whether we address it or not. And if we take time to let it breathe and put it out there and know that it's there, then when we start having a conversation, we might, number one, we might decide, you know what, this isn't the best time to talk about this. So let's table this. Let's get a good night's sleep. Let's pick it back up tomorrow morning when we're both fresh. Or it might be that once we sort of vent like how frustrated we both are or how frustrated I am, and I get to set that aside, it's like, okay, now let's talk about what the problem is. Let's talk about what it looks like. And I think that's how we would do. Like if a best friend came to you and was just like, was just vibrating with frustration, you'd say, okay, wait a minute, what's going on? Like, tell me about what's going on, because you're not in a place to problem solve. Like, let's talk about that first. And I think that's basically the instinct. That's where the relationship test comes in. Yeah. How would I handle this if this was my spouse or my best friend or somebody I really cared about? Trust that instinct and go there.
Yeah, really nice. Very, very nice. Someone, Jean B, just put forth, she thinks the conversation is the relationship was a reference from Crucial Conversations, which may be the case. So thank you for that, Jean. So I like what you're saying here, Jason, in particularly hey, this isn't going to be a constructive conversation, but you're not just letting it linger, that uncertainty piece that you were speaking to earlier. If you're not attending to that, how heavy does that uncertainty become if you don't know what your partner or your coworker or your boss or employee, if we can use that, but if you don't know what you're thinking and they know you're mad,
right?
Like,
yeah, and that's exactly right. Like it's always, I think it's interesting. One of the things that has been really counterproductive, I think, over the years in regards to communication is we've kind of, in fact, I was with another group this morning. We were talking about this, about how somewhere we got this, like, we have to get it right. We have to get it right. And so when it's a high stakes, what feels like a high stakes conversation, or I made a mistake, or there was a failure, or we need to talk about some emotionally heavy thing, well, we need to go in the bunker and figure out a plan and get this right, and what's the message and all this. And while you're doing that, the flame you keep throwing fuel on the fire, because it just keeps getting worse and worse, as opposed to pulling somebody in and just saying, hey, listen, something's going on. Clearly we're upset. Let's talk. I mean, I had a boss once that we had something happen on a Monday that I knew it didn't go great, but it was what it was. We went our separate ways for the week. I got an email on a Friday night sort of blasting me about what had happened on Monday. Like, this had existed all week and had become this huge thing by Friday night. And I'm like, like by that time it's looked like, like I was trying to like burn the company to the ground. And it's like, wait a minute. Like, what is going on? And it was just because like we didn't get into the conversation when it happened, and we didn't fix the fracture right away, and we let those feelings sort of get fanned, and the flames get bigger. And so it's important to address those as they happen. Yeah, for sure. And one little nuance that came to my mind as I was hearing you talk about our drive to get it right. Maybe subtly different. Let's not objectify it, and it's the need to be right. Like, right. I am right, not necessarily that the thing I did was right, but I need to feel right. right. Yes.
Right?
Well, and I think that's where your Ram Charan quote is right on the money, because dialogue at its very foundation is about seek first to understand, yes, and then to be understood. And if you can live in that space, all of this other stuff starts to come into it. Yeah. One other question I have for you, Jason, and then we're going to move on to Pam. What role does listening play in the conversation? I think listening is everything. And that goes back to back to the dialogue. And I see, sort of listening as a tool. So I didn't call that out, I guess, as a, separate element of like a relationship, but listening is a tool that is so critical, especially in that when I unpack the communication further in workshops with clients or with teams, one of the things we do is we talk about like what do great communicators do? Like, we try to break that down, and listening is always one of the very first things that come up. As they listen first, they try to understand, and then they communicate, they bring a message, and they're always paying attention. So I think that always bubbles up, and yet we're very poor at that. Organizationally, we're very poor. We're poor as leaders, we're poor as managers, we're poor as HR teams. If we double down on listening, that would go a long ways towards helping us understand where uncertainty is and how to create more clarity. Yeah, love it. So maybe a practice for folks, rather than preparing to get your speech and make your points understood to the other people, maybe prepare yourself to how can I really listen and be porous and take in what this other person is offering me, and not take any pauses in that conversation as an opportunity to reload and get my word in, but really how do we just stay and take someone else in and receive what's coming up for them. Absolutely. Love it. Thanks so much, Jason. Awesome. Thank you. Awesome content. We're going to be bringing up our friend and colleague, Miss Pamela Potts. Hi, Pamela.
Hey.
Thanks for being with us here this morning, or today, wherever you are, time zone. I guess it's afternoon where you are in Kansas City, so happy afternoon to you.
Thank you.
Pamela helps leaders take an energy-based strengths approach that helps guide people to do the work that they love. A powerful female business speaker with a philanthropic heart, Pamela brings an entrepreneurial background, marketing and technology skills to push forward new and innovative ideas. She's built 3 education technology businesses from the ground up. She's founded a young women's empowerment nonprofit organization, and is an advisor and board member for several nonprofit organizations. Pam is our Chief Partnerships Officer at StrengthScope, and I get the sheer joy of experiencing the pleasure of working with Pam every day. So Pam combines this great wisdom, humor, insight, and a lifetime of experience to encourage
great accomplishments in others. So Pam, without further ado, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. What a great privilege to be here today and to just chat with everyone and hear really what's on our deep heart of really what we feel our calling is to bring, our message to the world. And I really feel strongly about the things that we are doing around strengths and what energizes us. And I want to share some information with you and then have a little discussion about this. So let's take a look at one thing that I would love to start with, and that is you at your best. I want to take and just pause for a moment. I know we've had a lot of great content, good interaction with questions and conversations in the chat window. I just want to take and pause for just a moment, and I'd love to hear some information from you guys and some feedback from you. Think about when you were at your best. What were you doing? What was it feeling? And can you describe that in the chat window? And I'm going to pause for just a moment so I can see what you guys say. So what kind of things come up for you when you think about that time that you're at your best? You're really in that zone. You forget about time, gets away from you, and you look up and all of a sudden it's 3-4 hours later, or maybe you're interacting or whatever that looks like. What would those feelings be? Awesome. Aligned, passionate, happy, creative. Awesome. Confident, smart, capable. Awesome. Awesome. Authentic, engaged, scared and working together. There you go. Accomplished, fulfilled. Thank you for these comments. This is so great. This is so great. So what happens if you could do that more every day? And I'm going to get back to my screen here. What happens if you could do that more every day? And sorry, I got to go back to my screen really quick. Thank you. So I want to give you some space a little bit to really ignite and reignite the authentic you. Really understand what makes you come alive. Authentic. When you're authentic and you can lead authentically, when you can be at your best, it comes from a different place. As we were talking a little bit, and Chuck was talking a little bit about the manager versus the employees and the leaders and stakeholders. And when we're transitioning or doing things differently, it takes energy. It takes space to do those things. So how can we then come to the table and be our best? And how can we then show up and be our best every day? So I want to talk to you a little bit about this. And again, what makes us come alive? So as we talk about those words that you were writing in the chat window, as we think about this is really the strength that we can bring to the table. Those are kind of the feelings. A lot of what you wrote on there were not the things that you were good at. And I would love to talk about this just a little bit more around the word strength, because oftentimes we think of the word strength as something that we're good at. I'd love to challenge that just a little bit and expand it just a little bit to also understand that strength is something that makes you feel strong. It's about energy as well. It's not just about what we're good at, but it has to make us feel strong. So here is a chart that I'd like to talk to you a little bit about. As we look at areas of competence, oftentimes, again, as we look at strength, we look at the things that we're good at, we're talented at, we have abilities, we're competent in those areas. And when we add to that full definition of strengths, it also includes these areas that energize us, these intrinsic motivators. And where those two things align, that's really where our true strength is. And as we look at our strengths, as we look at how we can come to the table and be our best, oftentimes we expect ourselves to be well-rounded. We expect ourselves to be able to do everything. And I want to tell you a little story about some research that was done. Gallup did some research around strengths, and they were looking for what would be top strengths that the best leaders would have. And of all the research they did, and the thousands, literally thousands of leaders that they studied, what they found was there were not certain strengths that most leaders had, but what they did have was awareness around their strengths, and they were able to lean into those strengths and understand then areas of weakness and surround themselves with a team then that could complete them. So we look at ourselves and we look at areas that we can be strong in, and how can we then understand how we can bring that to the table in even a stronger way. And as we look at our definition, again, as we're looking at strength, then what are you? What does that look like for you? What does your leadership look like? We can't be like everybody else. And it's important that we understand that we need to lead. You need to lead like you. Like we were talking about, we do have an expectation oftentimes that we should be able to do it all. We work on when we look at performance reviews, most performance reviews talk about not only, yes, what we did do well, but we also look at the things that these are areas that we need to fix. And we have that real deficit type of mindset oftentimes at work and trying to fix and be, again, well-rounded. When we look at taking more of a strengths-based approach, what we see is that when we do emphasize strengths and we really lean into those things and we help people develop even more around their strengths, then performance does increase. When we spend time, and this is research showing us this, that when we spend time really trying to help people on their weaknesses and get better on their weaknesses, performance actually drops. So let's look at, again, when we support the strengths-based approach, we have higher probability of productivity. We have higher probability of customer loyalty and retention. Again, when we can look at the things that we do well. When we look at using our strengths, we talked a lot about disconnect with engagement. We've talked a lot about showing up to work and how we're not passionate, how, again, statistics show us over and over again how our passion at work is so low, our engagement at work is so low. When we look at our strengths and when we can use those every day, think about the things that you wrote in the chat window. If you could do more of those things every day and you could use your strengths every day, then again, statistics show us that we're more likely to be engaged on the job, 6 more times likely to be more engaged in the job, and 3 more times likely to be more happy with our lives in general. As we look at our energizers, they are our specific thumbprint. And our Strength Scope tool actually does an assessment, and it's a psychometric test that shows you how you are energized. In this specific wheel, we can see that we have blue bars and we have pink bars. The pink bars are the areas of energy. The blue bars, especially the ones that are lower, are things that are drainers. Those are things that are energy drains when we have to do tasks that really do involve a lot of the things that, again, those smaller blue bars. For example, in this specific person, as we look at detail orientation, this person would be drained by having to keep track of all these little details. Whereas in the relationship side of it, relationship building, leading, collaboration, developing others, that's where they get their energy. That's what makes them come alive. And when we look at each one of us has our own thumbprint. We are different from person to person. And in fact, when we look at all of our energizers in this way, if we look at the top 7 in the same order, if you can see some of those bars are longer, if we look at those in the same order, we are like someone else in 1 in 1.7 billion to have the same top 7. If we look at the top 10 in the same order, it would be 1 in 7 trillion. Literally, it's our unique thumbprint that we bring. And when we look at not only what we do and how we are energized and what makes us come alive, we also know that what makes someone come alive and what energizes them may be something that drains me, and the opposite. As I was looking at when I first started actually working with StrengthScope, I've been using the StrengthScope tool for about 1.5 years in my coaching and training programs. And the last 6 months have been, or 8 months have actually been with the StrengthScope team. When I first started working with StrengthScope, one of my colleagues has different energizers than I do. And, how does this really work in the workplace? And how does this become a part of a conversation? And so as we were kind of navigating that a little bit, there was an email that we were having with one of our clients, and I was leading that. She was copied on that. And there was one response and questions that we got from the client, that there was a big list of things that they were looking for, and they wanted some details around that. And so that email came in about 4:30 in the afternoon. I thought, oh, that's something I'll get to the next day. So Anissa, my coworker, the next morning, she immediately took that and responded to that email. And my initial reaction, which I was kind of a little shocked about in my response, but my initial reaction to that was, what is going on with that? Is she trying to one-up me? She knows things. She's been here longer, so she thinks she knows. And some of the details I may have had to ask her about it. But again, it was something I was newer on the job. But when I was looking at that, I was looking at my initial thinking around that situation. And I thought, what is going on with this? So what I realized that is I have tools to understand what energizes me and what drains me, and what energizes Anissa and what drains her. And as I look at those things, I could take that situation, and rather than being a conflict between us and causing rifts and lack of communication and all the things that go on with workplace conflict, I looked at that conflict as an object. And I realized that, okay, her energizers are detail orientation, efficiency, she has empathy, so she wants to go ahead and get those emails answered and help me. And as I was looking at all of that, I realized that those are areas that were drainers for me. And I felt very vulnerable in the things that I had, those energizers that she had that were draining me. It made me feel like I expected myself to be well-rounded. And even though we can look at this, we do have to apply it to our lives as we look at how does this really work in the workplace. So it makes a different conversation when I realized that those are the things that she and I can work together on. Again, leaders, as we look at how can we help each other and how can we work together, what energizes someone may drain someone else. And again, it's our own unique energy thumbprint. When we can live in this space of energy is contagious. Just like attitude is contagious, and we can come to the table and we can be excited about the work that we're doing and the tasks that we can do, that we can bring our best work to the table. That is where we can, again, ignite that in others as well. When we start to do the things that we've been talking about today. We've been talking a lot about our organizations. We've been talking a lot about individual responsibility, how, as Jason was talking about, again, challenging the way that we think. And as we look at things and approaching things differently in our work differently, we have to understand that it is going to take a mindset change. Something that Chuck talked about initially was that we need to think about things differently. Change is the only constant in life. And we know that to be true, that there are quotes around that, and we know that change is the only thing that is constant. And when I look at change and how much energy it takes, when we look at the things that we are doing and how we're energized, how our energy is depleted, we have to understand how our batteries are recharged. And again, as we look at this open mindset around growth and how can we then fuel that. What I'd like to work with when we are working with people is keeping people on this path of possibilities. Again, this is all about that mindset that we were talking about. So how can we stay in that positive frame of mind? When we get sucked down that path of limitations, we know we've got those negative emotions, we narrow our choices, we have fear and mistrust that happens in the workplace and within our own selves. If we can stay in that path of possibilities, we again look at the choices. We bring trust to the table, we bring hope. Again, we have that energy and that sense of empowerment that we all need. So as we look at making these changes or this awareness, I'd love for you to start with something. Since this may be a little different place than what you've really thought about before. Again, we usually think about what we're good at. So as we add this energy piece to it, what I'd love for you to think about is this, is go ahead and just take a notebook and write down in a notebook, divide it in half like I've done here. And as you can see here, I've got energizing tasks and draining tasks. I'd love for you just to have an awareness around this first. What energizes you? What are the things that you're doing that makes you feel alive? And then on the other hand of that, what are the things that you're doing that may be sucking the life out of you? What are the things that maybe you are procrastinating around, that maybe you get grumpy about? What are those things? What are those kind of tasks that you do maybe daily or weekly or monthly? Just keep an awareness journal and start to write them down. When you start to be aware of them, then there can be strategies that you do that you can actually learn how to reframe tasks. Maybe you can switch tasks with somebody. There's lots of different strategies that we could talk about, but we won't have time, of course, today. But there are a lot of things that we can do with that information once we're aware of that. So I just really want to encourage you with that, first of all, is just be aware. And what is one thing that you can take away from this today as we look at, again, in this space of energy? So I just really want to thank you for being here, and again, for letting us have some time today to chat about all of this and this space of energy. And again, my heart and passion is really helping people really understand themselves, to help them understand that so that they can have others, and we can use this as a basis for communication and really understanding how we can do our best work. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Pam. That was great. So great. Love all this information on energy. As you know, we're our partners in this conversation, so appreciate you carrying the torch today. A couple questions have come in for you. First one being, how do we respond when we're taking this into, it's maybe not an OD or HR practitioner that's in this conversation, but we're trying to take this energy conversation or strengths-based conversation into a C-suite of a large enterprise organization. Like how, and they're like a little bit suspicious. I think you said something about woo-woo earlier. Like how do you how do you step into that conversation with the C-suite person that thinks this is all new age hippy dippy stuff?
Right. Well, energy really is a source of everything.
Mm.
I mean, you can tell when you talk to people, are they energized or are they bored? What they bring to the table, what they bring to that conversation. And really, when we look at the source of energy, this is not woo-woo, this is science. And when we can base it on science, that's how those conversations can happen with C-suite.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, do you have more there?
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that. The next question that just came in here is the question's around, is it a little bit optimistic perhaps to believe that everyone could possibly love work? And this person goes on to say, I mean, aren't there really like crap jobs out there that someone just has to do? Like, so how do we think about an energy-based approach when there is this shared sentiment that there's still crap work out there to do?
Right. Well, there's always things about everything that we do that are not going to be our best place. So if we can be aware of those, we can use what does help us come alive. And it might not be the job itself. It might be something about relationship building. It might be something about having that greater purpose and being able to tap into that greater purpose of your organization. So there's a lot of deep things that can come out if you really think about where your source of energy comes. But you have to know who you are first. You have to know what is lighting your fire. What is it that makes you come alive? And then how can you be aware of that and reframe the things that you're doing so you can pull it through the things that does bring you life?
Yeah. So that's, you're tying back in with, I think, stuff that Chuck had said, this mindset and knowing yourself, right? I think some of this research suggested the Gallup stuff that you were pointing to, Pam, and help me out here if I get this wrong. The best leaders are the ones that know themselves very intimately, and they spend the majority of their time doing both what they love and what they're good at. Did I get that right?
Right. When you can put people in the space where those two overlap, the skills and the energy, that's where we'll do our best work. So as a leader, come back and circling back again a little bit more to that C-suite conversation as well. When you're looking at, it's not just about you and it's not just about each individual person. It's really, how does this all come together as a whole? How can we help each person really contribute their highest and best? How can we help them really, again, bring their best work to the table? And that's really the job of a leader, is really helping people be at their best.
Yeah. So that, getting back to that, what did you call it? A spiky leader? Yeah. And allowing people not to have to smooth that thing out and be good at everything, but really understand themselves, understand what makes them come alive. And then how do we get organized around helping people spend more time in those spaces? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Last question here, Pam, that just came in is how does this relate to the popular conversation of purpose, which seems to be somewhere in this work revolution, future of work conversation? So what's the relationship between energizers and purpose, if you have a point of view on that?
Well, we can go to work and we can do it well. And we sometimes know that we can do things well, but it is draining for us. When we look at, again, understanding ourselves first, what makes us come alive, I think as we look at really tapping into, then how can we utilize that to really be alive in our work, bring our best to the table. And as we look at what drives us, that gets deeper into the core, again, around what we're passionate about. And as we look at what we're passionate about, and we can align with our company in what their beliefs are, and we can tap into that workspace of, again, what are we doing that's a part of the bigger picture? What is our voice? What is it that we have that we can contribute in the best way that we can? If we could be there, along with, again, using these other tools that we've been hearing about today from Jason and Chuck about humanizing work. How beautiful would that be around humanizing work and communication, and knowing how really, again, we can contribute the best. How can we be the most productive in what we do and contribute our best?
Yeah.
So I think down deep inside of that is where we're going to find our passion.
Yeah. So helping, understanding one's, I love how you put that, like that energetic thumbprint, I think is what you called it. Like how does that help move someone along their inquiry around purpose, and where those two come together, and how can we make commitments, and to Chuck's earlier points, take responsibility for our own way of being in the world, and be adults and not wait for someone else to tell us what to do.
Right. Absolutely.
Very cool.
Absolutely.
Pamela, thank you so much for bringing the strengths conversation into this. And at this point in time, I'm going to invite Jason and Chuck back onto the stage, if you will, and would really love to open this up to all of you. And there've been some questions coming in, but since you've all each had a chance to hear one another speak, I'm curious if there's any lingering connections that any of you want to make relative to what some of your other panelists have said.
Go ahead, Jason, if you got something. I've always got plenty to say.
Go for it, Chuck. You've been sitting the longest, man.
No, it's a delight to hear what you guys have shared. Relative to what I've shared, it's all pretty seamless, works together really well. I think engagement is the huge issue. It's the 800-pound gorilla in America, and your simple approach to actually being human at work is the defining moment in all that. I think the research shows very clearly that when you're nice to people, they make you more money. I mean, this is not brain surgery, but it seems to be taking we have to give lobotomies or brain surgery of some sort in order to get the point across. Stop trying to make your assembly line run faster. Stop trying to make more fancy stuff happen, and be nice to your people and watch what that does for your bottom line. And I think Strength Scope just, again, feeds into another way that you could test for that. We use Strength Scope internally to help us figure out how we relate to each other, and making sure we have all the appropriate things on our team in terms of the people strengths and that kind of stuff. So I just love the way the three things work together to support each other. Yeah, nice, Chuck. Thanks so much. Jason, anything come up for you? We can continue to attend to some questions.
You know what? Tackle the questions.
Yeah,
I think,
cool.
I talked a little bit about the sort of connective tissue, I think, between my content and Chuck's. And I think, Pam's really helped sort of unpack how it's also just really important that we not only understand who we are, but understanding the people that we're in relationship with. And the more we understand that, the more it's easy to build a strength of relationship. So I do think so much of this ties together at just very different levels.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. One of the questions that came up was kind of pulling from a couple different of the presentations. In Chuck's conversation, I think you were talking about Semco and this notion if you commit to selling 57 widgets this week and you've sold 57 widgets by Wednesday, take the rest of the week off and go home. How does that relate to some of the stuff that Jason was talking about in the context of relational equity and not leaving your teammates kind of stranded on the field when they still have a long list of to-dos and you're just piecing out? Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on that.
Yeah. When people hear self-management, they hear anarchy and chaos. And that's not at all. It's actually much more organized and much more relational and much better communications, because the one of the foundations of it is that you live in community. As a self-managed person, anybody who's self-managed, they figure out how to live in their neighborhood without making their neighbors mad and keeping their commitments to their neighbors. And so, if they're going away, they have somebody else get their mail, and we take care of our neighbor's lawn. And, we just work together because we're a team. So you're never on self-managed by yourself. I prefer the concept of self-managed individuals living on self-managed teams, where the team has a commitment to each other through their commitment letters and the way they've organized their metrics and all that. Here's what our team needs to get done each day, week, month, year. And we're committed to that together. And so we will work together to figure that out. So, for instance, one of my clients in Dublin, he has engineers who drive around on trucks and suck grease out of grease vats. You know, not exactly a high-tech job, but he's got a lot of these people. And at the beginning of the year, these people get together and they figure out who's going on vacation when. And then if somebody needs to take a Friday off, they make sure everybody else is covering their route. And so you never just take off. It's not chaos and anarchy. It's much more organized.
Yeah.
There was actually, I don't remember how long ago it was, 6 or 12 months ago, there was a story that I think went through the news circuits that was about a surfboard company. I don't know if you guys remember seeing this. I don't remember the name of the company. I wish I could remember it, but it was a company that made surfboards, you know, out in California, I think it was. And the employees were complaining because obviously the people that work in surfboard companies generally tend to be surfers. They were complaining that they're working through the best surfing time. And so the CEO said, listen, if you can figure out how to produce what we need to get done and get done half days, you can work half days all summer if you want and surf in the afternoon. And the employees figured out how to do it. Zero productivity change, maintained level of productivity, pay stayed the same, and yet they all got to go surf in the afternoon. You tell me that's not creating a better relationship for those employees. I mean, it works.
And Jason, to your point, the interesting thing there is that they are much more invested in figuring out how to make that happen than the company is.
Right.
We had a printing company where we tried to figure out how to get all 30 press people a 3-day weekend once a month. We couldn't figure it out. We gave it to them. Then they came back and said, well, the good news is we figured out how to get, the bad news is we couldn't figure out how to get a 3-day weekend. The good news is we figured out how to get 3 days off every week. And we said, do the presses still run 24 hours a day? Yeah. Are you hiring anybody new? No. Will the quality be the same? It was an absolutely elegant solution that none of us brainiacs could have figured out because it didn't impact us enough. And they figured it out and off they went. So yeah, that's a great way to do that. I want to real quickly, I saw one question here about seasonal environments. How do you create engagement and energized employees in a seasonal environment? Some of the things I put up there on that list of companies, I mentioned the tomato paste manufacturers. 50% of their thousands of people are seasonal. They're there for like 12 weeks and they're gone. So the overwhelming majority of their teams are seasonal, and they teach people right up front how to get involved in that. So I'm sure someone at the Morningstar Company in Sacramento, California would be glad to tell you, here's how we do this with thousands of people every summer.
Yeah. Nice. And Chuck, the riff that you and Jason were doing there about, it reminded me of your comment about ownership being one of the most powerful incentives, I think is the language you use.
Yeah, ownership is, the most powerful motivator that we have. We call that funny thing capitalism. And capitalism isn't about money. Capitalism is about ownership. I get to make decisions. I get to own my decisions, not just some money. That's capitalism in its best form.
Yeah. Very cool. Other question.
Jason, I don't know if you had any more on that engagement stuff for seasonal environments, but
I think one of the other things that building on what you said, one of the other things I think that's problematic is that we have come to sort of bucket. It's symptomatic, I think, of the bigger issue is that we've come to bucket like. We think that part-time employees are somehow differently motivated than the other grown-up human beings instead of just working different hours, or they work different times of years. Like they're all still adults. They all still, like if we treat them like adults and we treat them with the same expectations, oftentimes they'll reward us in the same ways as leaders. And so I tend to be of the same mindset. Like I think if we just treated everybody as adults, regardless of how many hours they work, it would work out okay.
And let me give you the principle we used behind that. You reminded me of it. In the industrial age, we had time-based work, and which leads us to say, well, if you work 40 hours a week, you're more valuable to us. You have a higher priority to us than if you work 20 hours a week. That's a time-based mindset. We pay you for how much hours you work, And if the more work you give us, the more value you have to us. In the participation age, it's results-based work. For every minute or every hour, whatever we agree together, you need to get us that. And if you get us that result, that's all we care about. So everybody gets us whatever result they should get us for the amount of time they work, and we're all happy with that. We have a 20-hour-a-week person who works 16 to 20 hours a week, and we went to the mountains for 2 days for our annual planning meeting, and that person came with us. And we brought her husband up at the end of the time, just like everybody else's for the overnight. We don't think of her, you have to remind me that Mindy is part-time. We just don't think that way. Mindy has her results she needs to get, and somebody else has their results they need to get, and that's the agreement we've made.
Yeah, very cool. Last question, Pam, I want to direct this to you. It came in earlier, and I think Jason started to attend to it on the chat, but there was this comment that someone had made about kind of the default mode of corporations today being suspicious. Watch your back, nothing personal. How does a strengths-based approach help get us over that hump of suspiciousness and watching our backs?
The first thing that comes to my mind is that that's really a deficit mindset rather than a growth mindset, and more of a leaning into your strengths kind of thought process. Not that you're going to, you do have to think about what you're spending your time thinking on. And if it's suspiciousness, can we turn that around and look for the goodness?
Yeah.
Look at something that people are doing well. That's a big change. But how can we encourage and be in that place where we're building relationship rather than taking it away and pulling from that?
Yeah.
You talked a lot about that relationship. That's a real different way of looking at a relationship if you're always in a situation place.
Yeah, and to the point that we've all made, it's this mindset, whether it's a growth mindset, fixed mindset, suspicious mindset, whatever, that mindset's so important in all of this. Thank you all for your time and contributions today and answering the questions. What I'd love to give you each a moment to do before we wrap is if you could tell folks on the call how we can find you and what you're working on and that you're really excited about. Just a quick, minute or two each as we bring this ride to a close. Why don't we start with you, Chuck?
Sure. Yeah, well, if you'll find me on a bicycle more than anywhere else, but if you can't find me there, you can go to chuckblakeman.com, or on Twitter, I'm at Chuck Blakeman, or you can just put Facebook, Chuck Blakeman, LinkedIn, Chuck, so you kind of get a theme there. And it's not just me. There's 8 of us working in our company full-time and 12 part-time, and so we'd love to talk with any of you to see how we can help push you forward or answer questions or give you resources. So that's the URL and the link is Chuck Blakeman.
And then Crankset Group for...
And then cranksetgroup.com, you can go there and search for stuff as well, but you'll find most of that stuff through Chuck Blakeman as well, so I'll give you that one to think about, and you can tree out from there. We have a number of other things.
Very cool. Thanks, Chuck. Jason, how about you?
So to find me, it's a similar story here, except using my name, jasonlauritsen.com. If you go to Google, go to the Google and type in my name, you'll find a lot of ways to find me, whether that be Facebook or Twitter or website or whatever. But jasonlauritsen.com is a pretty safe place, or you can email me, jason@jasonlauritsen.com. In terms of what I'm excited about, right now, I'm sort of doing an awful lot of writing. Working on a book to publish next year about it's about performance management, and really about how we can use performance management kind of as the operating system to make our organizations more human friendly. And so I'm excited about that. It ties into what we're talking about. And I'm also going to be launching a new podcast here at the end of the year. So just a bunch of cool, fun stuff. So anybody that wants to keep tabs on that, the website's a good place to do that.
Awesome. Look for Jason on the Google machine. Pam, bring us home.
Yes. StrengthScopeUS.com is our website. And we're just excited to be able to work with other practitioners and other coaches and organizations as well to really just kind of bring this strengths-based approach and around this piece of energy where, it's been missing from the conversation. So that's the main thing, is just helping people come alive.
Yeah.
Feel their inner aliveness at work every day. And that's
and you're also on Twitter at Pamela Potts.
Pamela Potts.
Very
Yes.
cool. And Facebook, Pamela Potts. See, there's a theme here.
There's a theme.
Great. I'm Kent Frazier. I can be found on Facebook at Kent Frazier, Twitter at lovework_Kent. And thanks again, Pamela and Jason and Chuck and all of you who joined us today for our mini conference, Work Shouldn't Suck. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and we wish you all the best going forward.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, everyone.